Hi again then guys, and welcome to another specific car review for Forza Motorsport 7, and this time we're taking a look at a car which isn't new to the Forza franchise. It's not really even a returning car. It's been in the game for quite some time and hasn't dropped out like the 911 GT1 did. This car is of course the Porsche 962, or the 962C as it's called in the game, a Group C class race car, one of the long tails as they're often called. As many of you guys know, I'm a huge fan of long-tail race cars, and the 962 is kind of the benchmark in that category. There have been others. My personal favourite prototype, the Nissan R92CP, is also a long-tail, and a variation of this car even won the Le Mans in 1994 under the guise of Door, the Door 962 LM. Now this car is a vehicle, as I said, which has been a part of Forza for quite some time. And the problem with that is even a car that's really good can get to the point where people either take it for granted or start not using it because you have all these flashy new options. Plus, when it comes to the world of Forza 6 and Forza 7 in particular, many of the cars which used to be dominant just aren't anymore. As I mentioned in yesterday's episode for the Mazda Lola, the Mazda B09-86 used to be incredibly quick. It's no way near that fast anymore, partially because of the engine swap options. Now this car is very notable because it hasn't been neutered. Like the Sauber C9 from Mercedes, it is still one of the fastest cars in the game, easily one of the fastest prototypes, at least in a straight line, but unlike the Sauber C9, the Porsche 962 doesn't tend to have as favourable a reputation among most players. On older Forza games in particular, this was one of those cars which was very, very low in the top category. I believe it was S1 or whatever it would have been back then. It wasn't the X class, but it was close to it. R1 maybe, I think it was R1 back then on Forza 4. But you could quite easily detune this car to, say, the R2 class, which would be more like a GT class machine, just by fitting it with drag tyres. It was that close to being in a lower class. And that is kind of a shame, because this car in real life is an absolute legend, and it's not really treated all that well in the world of Forza. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily unrealistic, because back then, of course, cars were much more leery. They didn't have as advanced tech as they do now, so it would be fair for the car to not be quite as good. However, there are plenty of other Group C prototypes, including the Sauber C9, which do still handle really well. So the fact that this one doesn't seems kind of odd, especially given how dominatingly successful the 956 and the 962 was in real life. So what gives? Is this a car which is great in a straight line but rubbish around corners, or is it a car which is just maybe more of a challenge to tune or more of a challenge to use? Something along the lines perhaps of a Nismo GTR LM, which is nothing like any of the other cars, but if you use it correctly, it can be brilliant. Well, to some degree, I would actually say that that's the case, because the Porsche 962 doesn't have as much power as you might assume. In stock form, of course, stock is a relative term, 720 horsepower is what you're looking at, with a pretty impressive 590 pound-feet of torque. Now, it weighs a little bit less than some of the newer prototypes at 890 kilos, and that means that straight out of the crate you're looking at over 800 horsepower per tonne. Now, the class is a lot higher now on Forza 7 than it was before, 982 in the P category. That is very high for this car, but the characteristics of the vehicle haven't really changed that much. It's still not necessarily going to beat everything around corners. In fact, it can be beaten by a number of other prototypes on tight technical circuits. But that was never the strongest point about the 962. One of the great things about the car now, I would say, is that the handling is similar. It certainly has the similar characteristics that it used to have, but it's definitely better. Back on, say, Forza 4, for instance, this car was almost unbeatable in a straight line. The Sauber could come close, but even then the acceleration couldn't match this one, even though the top speed could. That hasn't really changed. This is, as far as I'm aware, by far the fastest prototype in Forza 7. Nothing else can keep up with it for sheer straight line speed. The Sauber can get to the same kind of top speed, but it takes longer to get there. Around corners, though, That's where the biggest improvement has taken place, because on older Forza games the 962 was simply never that good. It always felt a little bit too dull, almost too heavy in a weird kind of way. It felt like it had so much turbo lag that the low-end acceleration wasn't that good, and it would often be very slippery. Now those inherent characteristics are still there. It hasn't really changed. I'm not going to say that it suddenly handles like a 919, of course not. But the difference is, with higher downforce, even with de-restricted power of well over 800 horsepower, I think it's around 880 if I remember correctly, it handles a lot better than it used to. In fact, now, if you use this on the right circuit, you can quite easily post lap times that can rival much newer machines. But at the same time, you've got yourself a car which can literally do 268 miles per hour flat out. Now, it doesn't have a huge amount of downforce anyway, but the downforce now has a much, much greater effect than it used to. The downforce settings on this car used to be horrendously low. It's much better now, and you can actually feel the downforce for a change, which is a nice difference to have. Now, the car won't necessarily appeal to everyone. Again, in a very similar way to the Nismo GTR LM, but with a price tag of 750,000 credits, I would say that's a pretty good deal. It's a car which I believe is a little bit cheaper because of the fact that many people aren't as interested in it, but at the same time it is a lot cheaper than some of the other Group C cars, and it's worth buying. I would straight up say that this is a prototype that's worth buying, because although you might not use it everywhere, this is one of those track weapons where if you use it under the right circumstances, it won't just win, it will dominate. Around Le Mans, for instance, with the new or old track layout, but especially with the old track layout without the chicanes, nothing comes close. The Sauber can kind of hold a candle to it, but even then, not really. In a straight line, it's a monster. And it can quite handily outrun the vast majority of supercars in the game as well. So although this is a car which is certainly easy to take for granted, because we've had it for so long on Forza, and also it didn't exactly used to be great around corners, now I would say that definitely has changed for the better. It's got more downforce, the downforce that it has feels more effective, it's much smoother and wheel spins a lot less out of corners, but at the same time it hasn't lost a huge amount of top speed in the same way that many of the other prototypes have over the years. So overall I would say that this is an old faithful model, if you will, that is certainly still worth checking out. But that's it for this pick overall. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.